Brilliant. I think we are actually live. Well, hello. Welcome everybody to welcome to everybody who is watching. Thank you very much for joining us today on what will be a very special live broadcast. Today is Wednesday, the 11th of November, Remembrance Day. 102 years ago today, peace was officially declared and one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history finally drew to a close at the loss of many, many, many lives and shattered families. I think that the legacy is something we still live with in many ways that we probably don't even realise today. But anyway, less about that. I'm very pleased to be joined by two very, very special guests, if I'm allowed to say it, two of our favourite partners. I'm joined by Charlotte Pearce from the Imperial War Museum and Elizabeth Smith from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. So I'll do some quick intros and then we'll get started. So a little bit about Charlotte. So Charlotte's worked with the Imperial War Museum, IWM for short, since 2003 in a variety of roles. She was the manager of the fantastic Lives of the First World War project, one of my favourite things to work on ever actually, in partnership with us, Findmypast. Charlotte has a degree in politics and modern history, as well as an MA in art gallery and museum studies, and in her spare time, she's a freelance tour guide of First and Second World War sites in Europe. So if anyone watching has any unrelated questions about touring the sites in Europe, feel free to ask those in the questions as well. And a little bit about Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the Public Engagement Coordinator for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for the North of England. Elizabeth joined the CWGC in 2018 and has since been working to promote the hundreds of cemeteries in this region to the public. Very important work indeed. Elizabeth's background is in teaching rather than history, so research, I think we're all still learning when it comes to research. No one ever stops learning, really. And one of her greatest achievements has been researching and writing a tour of the war graves at Stonefall Cemetery in Harrogate. So before I say hello and let you guys say a little bit more about yourselves, just want to let everyone know in watching that we will be trying our best to answer some questions live at the end of the broadcast. While I can't see what you're commenting, Ellie is all over the comments, so don't be shy, say hello, let us know where you're watching from. And yeah, if you do have any questions, pop them in and we will try our best to answer as many as we can, depending on how much time we have left. So, Charlotte and Elizabeth, hello, thank you for joining us.
Hi.
Hi,
oh, sorry, Charlotte.
No, I was going to say thanks for asking us.
Oh, our pleasure as always. So, yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourselves? I'm not sure who wants to go first.
Do you want to, Charlotte?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So, yeah, hi everyone. I'm Charlotte. I live and work in Manchester. So I'm normally based at IWM North, which unfortunately, due to COVID, is closed at the moment. So we're all working from home and our work continues. So I actually manage a network of different museums and organisations all around the world that look at conflict since the First World War. And so whilst we haven't been able to meet in person, I've been organising lots of digital events like this. And so in many ways, I'm busier than ever.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's, we've seen the same as well. I think one of the great things about online research is the ability to do it anywhere in the world, and there seems to be all-time high interest in it at the moment. So hopefully many people watching will be inspired to go away and learn more about the names that are inscribed on their local war memorials.
Do you want me to say something? Yeah. So I work for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which I'm sure the people watching will know commemorates the 1.7 million war dead from the First and the Second World War. And in my role as Public Engagement Coordinator, I give talks to groups, which obviously I'm doing online at the moment due to COVID. I've done a lot of work with taking school children to visit their local cemeteries, where there's quite often one of our casualties buried there. Lots of people aren't aware that we've got, I think it's 170,000 war graves actually in this country. For many people, when they think about the Commission, they just think about our sites abroad. But in the north of England, we've got over around 42,000 war graves in over 2,000 sites. So for many schools, there is a site within walking distance for their pupils to go and visit and find out about their local history, which is perhaps one of the most rewarding parts of the job when the children do research. Normally I get them to to look at their casualties from their local war memorial while I'm there, and use our website to research them. And when children look on there and they click through and they see in the additional information, this casualty lived on High Street. Oh, my grandma lives on High Street, you know, and they start to make those connections with the casualties that we commemorate.
So what was that figure again? How many did you say were in the UK again?
In the UK, it's 170,000 war graves and 130,000 commemorated on memorials here. So casualties who were missing in action, and there was no body to bury. So some of those are naval war memorials that we have, some memorials for the Air Force, you know, when people set off on missions and we've no idea what happened to the plane, that, you know, there were no bodies to be buried. And
I didn't realise they were that. I guess it's probably fair to assume then that you're probably never that far away from a war grave, wherever you are in the country.
You never are very far away from a war grave, and we've got usually cemeteries have our green Commonwealth War Graves sign on the outside of them near the entrance, saying that there are Commonwealth War Graves within the cemetery or the graveyard, which is a good indicator. But we're working on that programme to get them in every single site, but we haven't completed it yet.
Important work. Well, and hello, Paul. Sorry, I've just spotted you there. How are you?
Hello, Alex. Hello, Liz and Charlotte. Hello. Nice to see you all.
Hi.
Hi.
So Paul's probably a familiar face to quite a few people watching. Paul is our very own in-house military expert, and very good to see you, Paul. Hello. So before we kick off, I probably should do a quick description of what we're actually talking about today. So one of the things we're hoping to encourage this Remembrance Day is to encourage you, the viewing public, to start researching your local war memorials and war graves. You know, every single name on these memorials represents a story, and many of these stories are yet to be told. You may be in a similar position to me, where I've kind of got as far as I can with my World War ancestors. I found all the documents that I'm pretty confident have survived, or at least available online, and I've already built up quite a big picture of them. But I love military history. I'm fascinated by World War I records. I've got the bug, and I still wanted to carry on researching. So this is something anybody can do. Just, you know, as we've just said, you're never that far from a war grave. Go out, explore, note down the names, see what you can discover, and we would like to invite all of you to share any findings you do have with us on Twitter with the hashtag #RememberTheirStories. And just to repeat, so if anyone's just tuning in, before we dive in and have a look at, we've all been doing this ourselves. We've all gone away and had a look at some memorials and just picked names and to see what we could discover. But if you're just tuning in, just to remind you, we will be taking some live questions at the end of this broadcast. If you have any questions, whether it's about tracing military ancestors, whether it's about regiments, these will be questions for you, Paul, probably, medals, obviously the incredibly important work that the Commonwealth War Graves Commission do and the Imperial War Museum, pop them in the comments and we shall try our best to get through as many of them as we can. So without further ado, I will start sharing my screen and we will dive in. So has that come up for everybody? Can you perfect. So I believe, I think, Charlotte, are you up first? I think, let me just, does this look familiar?
Yes, that's mine, yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay, so the war memorial that I'm talking about that you can see pictured there is in Ince in Makerfield, which is a small town near Wigan in Lancashire. So this is a photograph of the cenotaph, and I've zoomed in there on two brothers, the McNamaras, and they are actually my great uncles, and I've already done some research on them, but I want to tell you a little bit about how my research about them has then opened up a new journey of discovery about someone that I had never heard of before.
Oh, wow.
So basically, I knew that these were my relatives. It was kind of told through the family, and I knew that they were called John and Thomas. And so to find their First World War experiences, I started with what I did know, which was about my great-grandma. So their sister, Catherine, So I ordered her death certificate, and from that got her date of birth and her father's name. And so that meant that I could then go to the census for 1901 and 1911 to find out more about the family. So they lived in Ince, in the same town where the memorial is, and as far as I can tell, they were there for most of their lives. As well as my great-grandma, there were also 2 more sisters and 2 older brothers as well. So the family, as the name suggests, originally came from Ireland, and they came to the UK in the late 19th century. The story goes that in my family that it was linked to the potato famine. So in 1901, 1911, obviously, John and Thomas would have been young. They were both at school at that time, but find out about what their parents did. So their father was an iron labourer and their mother was a housewife. So what I found out from this is I went to Soldiers Died in the Great War. I found both John and Thomas on there, and it confirmed that it was them because it mentioned the fact that they were from near Wigan. So John was in the Border Regiment, and he must have joined up pretty much as soon as the war started, because he was already in France in May 1915. Very sadly, he was killed and actually was declared missing on the 16th of May 1915. And so from that date, I then had a look at the war diary from that date to try and find out a bit about what was going on at that point with the battalion that he was in.
And where did you access those war diaries? So
the war diaries can be accessed on the National Archives website, so it's really, really useful to do. So if you do know of the battalion and the regiment, the ones that have been digitised, they're available on the website of the National Archives. And it doesn't usually name people individually, certainly not the rank and file, because John was just a normal private, but it does tell us that they were attacking German trenches on that day and that the battalion suffered heavily. So obviously that was when he was killed. My next step was to look at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission to find out where he was buried or commemorated. And sadly, he doesn't have a known grave, but he's commemorated on La Tour Memorial in northern France. And so have been out to that memorial to pay my respects, which was a really special thing. Meanwhile, his brother Thomas joined the Manchester Regiment, and again, kind of following the same path of inquiry, looking at soldiers died, looking at Commonwealth War Graves and the war diary. I found that he was killed in March 1918, so this was during the Spring Offensive. So again, it kind of gives you a sense of what was going on at that time. And sadly, again, he doesn't have a grave of his own. He's listed as missing, so he's on the Arras Memorial. So I already knew quite a lot about John and Thomas before you asked me to come on this programme. But what I did want to do was to explore something that I'd found through the pension record. Okay. So I was looking at the pension record for John McNamara, and there was also another soldier listed on there, a man called John Berry. Now he is listed as the son of the McNamara family, which doesn't quite make sense. Obviously, he does have a different surname, and basically, yeah, I've been trying to find out exactly what happened there. So he was in the East Lancashire Regiment. He's listed as their son, even though he has a different name. He most likely was in the regular army because he was in action in late 1914 in France. He was injured, but then resumed service. But then I found that later that he died on the first day of the Battle of the Somme in 1916. And again, looking at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, this was a really good source to see where he was buried and to find out more. So he's actually buried in Cawdry Old Communal Cemetery, which at the time was behind German lines. So I'm trying to work out if he was captured, about what happened there. So I think this shows that actually, you start off with 2 names and a memorial, and it's taken me down this path that I'm still on. I'm still trying to find out. But I think the main kind of point, I think, is to keep going, and you will hit brick walls, but all these fantastic sources are out there to try and help us, and so one day, hopefully, I'm going to be able to find out more about John Berry, what his connection to the family is, and perhaps find the war memorial that he's listed on, because he isn't listed on this one, interestingly. So yeah, so that was the story that I looked at, which is obviously very personal to me, as it's my family, but I'm also keen to look at the other people on the memorial as well and see what I can find out.
And you can apply those processes to anyone on the list, really. And
absolutely.
Did you encounter any difficulties with, given that John and Thomas McNamara are probably names that repeat a number of times? I imagine there's quite a lot. There would have been a fair number of soldiers. I mean, I'm Cox, which is I'm a Cox, which is not necessarily a rare surname, and there's loads of Coxes in the military service records, many of the same name. What kind of tricks did you use to get around that? Was there anything that helped in particular?
Yes, I think sort of going back to the census first, just so that you can get their age, like their date of birth. I think also getting their address, because often on the Commonwealth War Graves and soldiers died, it will tell you the town or perhaps even the address. So it just helps you to pinpoint the right person, because as you say, if you just look for J. McNamara, there's going to be so many results. So I think it's starting at the end almost and working your way backwards. So thinking about what you do know, which was their sister, my great grandma, and then kind of moving back and forth in time almost with the records to help you. And yeah, it certainly is, I'm sure many of the people watching enjoy this process of researching as well. It's a wonderful thing to be able to uncover these stories so many years later.
And especially when in many cases you probably will be the first person to do so, since they sadly lost their lives. I mean, a lot of these were young men who didn't have their own children, and people to remember them many generations later. So yeah, it's and actually, on that note, anyone watching, while we can't see your comments, other viewers can. So if you've done this yourself, and if you've got any stories to share, please do share them. I know our viewers love hearing about discoveries, whatever they may be. So brilliant. So moving on then, I think, who's up next? This
That's
is the
mine.
Ackworth, brilliant. Yeah. Ackworth War Memorial.
That's mine. So as I mentioned before, when I go into schools for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, I quite often, as well as taking children to see any war graves in their local site, we quite often research the names then that are on local war memorials. And I make up a little worksheet, and I've done it in advance, and I've picked the names that are the easiest from their list on their war memorial, so that when they put in, I don't know, John Higglebottom, they'll only get 6 John Higglebottoms, and they'll be able to work out which one's theirs, rather than putting in John Smith and getting 3,000.
Wait, that'd be a great way to put them off before they.
Yeah, a good name for children. So I do this quite a lot, and if I go into schools and they don't have a local war memorial, so for example last week I spoke to 2 schools, both in the same area of Fryston, which is near Castleford. There is a war memorial there, but it's only got World War I names on, and one school wanted World War I names, but one wanted World War II. So what you can actually do on our website, if you run a search on the Commission's website, there's on the additional functions to search, there's a box called additional information, and if you type in your village in there, then it will throw up anybody who's next of kin. It mentioned that village in the address, if that makes sense. So for the school that was doing World War II, the school was in Fryston, which is near Castleford. I just put in Castleford, and I got, you know, probably around 100 or perhaps even more of people from Castleford who had fought in the Second World War and had died. And I was able to get some really interesting casualties from that, including some civilian casualties, because we commemorate for the Second World War civilians who died as a result of enemy action. So anybody who died during the Blitz, for example, is on there. So it's a good way around of doing it, as well as using your own war memorial. You can also do it that way via our search.
I think that's something most people would probably never think to look for, civilian casualties.
Well, exactly. So it worked out really well. So when I got the call last week about doing this, I'd actually been into a school in Badsworth, which is a village near Ackworth, and two men who had shown up on their war memorial were the Cutt brothers. So like, I suppose like Charlotte, really, when I see two surnames the same on a memorial, my eyes are drawn to them. So when I knew I was going to be doing this, I thought, oh, I'll research the Cutt brothers, because one thing I discovered when I was doing this with the children last week is that both Cutt brothers, who are actually from Ackworth, and they're named on this war memorial as well, their World War I casualties, died on the same day in different places. I think it was the 22nd of October 1917, and I thought, oh, I've really got to research this. I couldn't get anywhere. I couldn't get any further with it than it. So I'm interested in there with Charlotte's talking about using the census perhaps, and trying to get an age and an address from there, and seeing perhaps going back to that when I'm a bit more skilled in research and seeing whether I can find the story of these two boys, because I just think that's, you know, incredible that they both died on the same day, but in different places on the Western Front.
And actually, one of the good things about census records is, well, on Findmypast anyway, you can search for multiple household members at once. So the fact that you've got two brothers, you'd be able to search for them together. That would narrow down your results massively.
Brilliant.
So whatever census you're looking at, whether it's 1911, go down other household member, pop the other brother's name in, and that should really narrow things down.
Oh, excellent. Oh, well, I'll maybe try and do that later on this evening then.
Let us know what you find. But I agree. It's incredibly poignant when you do see what is clearly multiple members of the same family on the same war. I mean, I always know my grandparents were from Cornwall, and obviously in Cornwall they've got very distinctive surnames, and there's all these tiny villages dotted around. And I remember going to the village memorial, and the names were so distinctive, there was no way these people weren't related. And in some instances you'd see 6 or 7 of the same name all locked up together. It was crazy.
Wow, it is. It's incredible. Well, this war memorial is a relatively new one. It was erected in the year 2000 by the people of Ackworth, and it commemorates the First World War dead and the Second World War. There's 83 names from the First World War and 40 from World War II. And when I was looking at it, my eye was caught by a female casualty. We can see there she's been circled, Dorothy Wardell. So obviously the commission commemorates men and women who served in the Commonwealth. So for women, they may well, for World War I, perhaps have been nurses, but also the Women's Royal Air Force came into existence in 1918. The Women's Royal Naval Service was in existence as well in the First World War, I think 1917 to 1919, before it was disbanded and then reformed again for the Second World War. And there's a Women's Army Auxiliary Corps for the First World War as well, so that we do commemorate female casualties. So I thought, well, that's the name that I'm going to choose to look at. Could you bring the next slide up?
Certainly can.
Okay, so Dorothy Margaret Wardell is her full name. I searched for her first of all on our commission database, and from that, in the additional information, I could see an address given for her parents. She was born in 1917 in Barnsley. Ackworth, by the way, is in West Yorkshire. It's really close to the boundary with South Yorkshire, so Barnsley is one of the nearest big towns to Ackworth. Her parents were Dorothy and Henry Wardell. I'm saying Wardell, by the way. I don't know if it's Wardell or Wardell, but Wardell seems to roll off the tongue better. So I'll stick with Wardell. Dorothy and Henry Wardell. Interestingly, I noticed when I looked on the census on the Findmypast website, Henry was actually 43 when he got married in 1914. And wow. Dorothy was 27, so there was a 16-year age gap between the two, which I thought, first of all, I thought I'd made a mistake, but I kept going back through all the censuses, and I thought, no, this is definitely right. So there was a big age difference there. So Dorothy was the second of two daughters. Her elder sister Frances was born in 1915, and on both sides, on her mother's side and on her father's side, it was all mining families. So Dorothy's father actually was a colliery manager, and on her mother's side, her mother's father was a colliery manager as well. It was interesting, again, using the censuses on your website, just to see how those families had moved around, because I think Dorothy's mother's family had started off in the northeast, and there were miners there. Then they'd moved to Wales. They had a child born down in Wales, and then they'd moved to Leeds, where there were her father was a colliery manager there. So it was interesting to get all this extra information. And I also thought I'd look for the uncles, Dorothy's uncles on both sides, to see whether any of them had any war service. And I think one of her uncles did serve in the army. He joined before the First World War. But of course, the other brothers were all miners, so that would have been a protected occupation. So none of them, I presume, I couldn't find any military records, so I presume that none of them served, because they remained as miners. So Dorothy herself went to Wath Grammar School, which is near Barnsley, and I could see on the 1939 register. Oh, do you know what? Have I put my slides in the wrong order? Actually, I'm just thinking, was there a slide with a hotel on? No, maybe I didn't put that one in. No, go back. It's fine. It's okay.
Oh, I'm going to spoil it there.
So yeah. So in the 1939 register, I could find a reference to Dorothy. I couldn't find anything for her sister Frances, but I found Dorothy, and Dorothy was living in London at 34 Bryanston Street, which is in Marble Arch, and she was living in some accommodation in an annex next to the hotel. So she was living next to the Cumberland Hotel, which is in Marble Arch, which is now a Hard Rock Hotel. It's still there. It had been built by J. Lyons and Co. of the J. Lyons Tea Shop, of the Lyons Tea Shop fame. It opened in 1933, so she started work there in 1939. So it was a relatively new hotel there. It had 2,000 members of staff working there. It had 900 bedrooms, all of them en suite, which I thought was rather forward thinking for the 1930s.
Yeah.
And it had this specially built annex where the 300 girls who worked in the hotel lived in either single bedrooms or double bedrooms. There was one bath for every 4 girls. And they had their own restaurant on the ground floor of this annex. So it sounded, I saw on the 1939 census, I could see these girls all listed, all as one person, separate people, but all under the same address. And Dorothy was working there as a housekeeper. So then I found out from a newspaper cutting, which we'll see in a minute, that Dorothy actually joined the Women's Royal Naval Service. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But if we just go back to the other side, because I'm just going to, so on the right hand side there, we've got the a poster to encourage young women to join the Wrens and free a man for the fleet. So I wonder whether it was a piece of, it was a poster like this that Dorothy saw that made her join up. Was it because she was in London? It was 1939 when she was there. The war would just be starting later that year. And as we know, there was a phony war, wasn't there, at the beginning of the Second World War, and people were trying to leave. So was she thinking, well, I mean, I don't know what happened to hotels. You can't imagine that a 900-room hotel would have kept all its staff on during the Second World War. Would it have closed down? I don't know. Was she looking for something else to do? So she joined the Wrens anyway. And the photo on the left, she's in there, but I don't know who she is. So she's one of those Wrens, but which one I don't know. And I found a little account actually from the BBC website from their World War II Peoples at War stories, which is an account from somebody who joined the Wrens. And like Dorothy, she was stationed at Leon Solent. So I wondered if I could just read that out, because it kind of gives us a little idea. So this lady was called Pat Rose. She joined the Wrens in 1944, and this is what she put. Meanwhile, I joined the WRNS together with my oldest friend, Wendy Hodgson. We were sent to Southsea for a 2-week induction course where we were issued with our uniform, 2 shirts, 2 jackets, 2 pairs of trousers, a greatcoat, hat and sou'wester, but we firmly spurned the woolly stockings and terrible underwear. We found a tailor who altered our uniforms to make them actually fit us, and finally we got to grips with the stiff collar and studs. At the end of 2 weeks, we were posted to Leon Solent, which was the HQ of the Fleet Air Arm. We were billeted at a hotel just outside the station, or camp as it was referred to, called the Mansfield Hotel. It had obviously been requisitioned, and we know that that is where Dorothy lived as well, at the Mansfield Hotel, and found ourselves in a small cabin, number 24 at the top of the house, with 2 other girls, Cherry and Poppet. From then on, the 4 of us were inseparable when off duty and didn't take life at all seriously. I don't think I have ever laughed so much in my life.
Oh.
Which I think is rather nice, because if we just move on to the next slide, we're going to read about Dorothy's death. So this is from the South Yorkshire and Mexborough Times. And it tells us then that Dorothy Margaret Wardell, who was a member of the WRNS, was reported killed by enemy action on Saturday. Interestingly, no description of exactly what happened there. Again, this is where I found out where she went to school, and that she'd only been with the WRNS for 3 months, and that she was this assistant housekeeper at the Cumberland Hotel, which then tied in with what I found out from the 1939 register. And we know her elder sister was also a member of the WRNS, although on the Findmypast site I found a marriage certificate which showed that Frances had married, it must have been in the December of that year, so she clearly had left the Wrens then. And then it tells us about the interment, but again, no mention of exactly where she was buried. Oh. And if you just move on then to the next slide. So when I found that she died, I looked on your website, and I could see the burial record, and I saw Dorothy's name there. And then when I looked up and down on the page, I saw all these other women with the same date of death.
Oh wow.
So I thought, hang on, what's going on here? So I then did a bit of a Google of Dorothy's name, which I always find is a good tip to do. And I found a record of a special commemoration service that happened a few years ago, that had been organised by some women who were members of the Navy, I think. And it told me a little bit more about the story. So Dorothy died on the 23rd of November 1940, and what happened was that the Wrens were all gathered together having their dinner, presumably at the Mansfield Hotel, when an anti-aircraft shell that had been shot up into the air and hadn't exploded came down, must have come through the ceiling, landed there and gone off, and 10 Wrens were killed in that accident. Oh, which wow. Again, I think is interesting why on the newspaper article it just says died as a result of enemy action. I mean, really, we would perhaps call that friendly fire today, because that was one of our shells. So it killed outright 10 Wrens. 8 of them are buried in the Haslar Cemetery, which is the naval cemetery down near Portsmouth. 2 of them are buried elsewhere. And there were more women were injured as well. So it was quite a sad, a sad tale in the end. And in fact, if you just click on a slide, I looked on Find My Grave website, and I could get the photo of Dorothy's Commonwealth War Graves headstone there. And also somebody had posted up another photo of a plaque which was erected at the Mansfield Hotel, which I think now is a site of a care home, which gives the names again of those others who died. I mean, you can see one was only 18, 2 and 19. So they're incredibly young. But the bit that I kind of liked from that little account that I read out that Pat Rose had written was how she said, I don't think I've ever laughed so much in my life.
Yeah.
And I think, well, perhaps for these three, I mean, perhaps that had been the same when she'd been in London as well, working in the hotel, because there she was with a load of girls. You know, she was in 22 was Dorothy when she died. She was just a couple of weeks short of her 23rd birthday. At that age, I imagine, being surrounded by a group of other young women, she would have been having a blast probably at the Cumberland Hotel, and then continued, hopefully, you know, she was able to enjoy life really to the full while she was with the Wrens. And then this absolutely really sad accident that's taken out 10 of those Wrens. It must have been absolutely devastating for the rest of those who were serving there at the time. And
always interesting to note that the true circumstances were obviously omitted from the public reporting at the time.
Exactly. So I think a Google of a name is quite often a good thing to do. I think if people are starting with their local war memorial, look for the unusual names and start with those first. That would be my tip, because it stops you getting disheartened, and then you can keep going back to the ones that are a bit more difficult to, you know, to research later, because it is amazing what you can find now on the internet.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you. That was fascinating. Yeah, we will all remember Dorothy.
Yeah.
So moving on, I think this is you, Paul, isn't it? Hello, Paul.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you. It's funny, really, listening to Charlotte and Elizabeth. Interesting that Charlotte's gone for First World War, Elizabeth for Second World War, and I actually went for Boer War.
Oh, wow.
But only because where I live in Chelmsford in Essex, there is a war memorial, of course, for the First War and the Second War, but it doesn't have names on it. You find names in local churches, and I think there's a role in the in a council building, but the memorial itself doesn't have names on. But there is this Boer War memorial, which commemorates men of the Essex Regiment, which was originally situated in Market Road and was then moved in the 60s when that whole area was redeveloped, and it's now in a place called Bell Meadow, which is where you can see in the photo on the right, you can see the shopping centre behind it. And you know, I remember this memorial as a small boy when it was in Market Road, and I've photographed it many times over the years, and I went back again this November and took some more shots of it. But that photo you see on the right was taken a few years ago. There are 207 names on the memorial, and there are 4 men called Kettle, like the pot and kettle. I thought I'd look at those. So if you can go to the next slide for me, please, Alec.
Sure.
Now, the problem with the Boer War, if you're researching soldiers who died, is that you probably won't find a service record for them, because the service records would have been destroyed. That goes for records of soldiers who died overseas, not necessarily in conflict, but you know, died of illness or sickness in India. The records were routinely destroyed, and so.
Was that only in instances of death, Paul?
Yes, it is. Yeah, because you can see the logic. I mean, there was no thought for family history and genealogy. And so what was the point of keeping a record for a soldier? There'd never be a pension claim for him or from him, so why keep the record? So the paperwork was destroyed. But there are still some records for these soldiers, of course. So you'll find them on medal rolls, and you'll find them through other publications that were contemporary publications. And luckily for me, there's an enormous amount of information in a local paper, the Essex County Standard, and so that's where I've drawn the information from. So who you've got here, and we'll talk about a little bit more about the Kettle brothers on the next slide, is Josh Kettle and Victor. So Joshua was the older of the 2 brothers, and you can tell that by the regimental numbers, actually, if you look at the numbers, because the numbers would have started at number 1, and then they go on. So 5246 for Victor is a higher number than 2940, so Victor would have joined later on. But they both served in the Essex Regiment, and they were both wounded at Driefontein in South Africa during the Boer War. Josh died of wounds on the 23rd of February, having been wounded on the 18th. And Victor died on the 10th of March, having been wounded, on the 11th of March, having been wounded the previous day. So Mrs. Kettle and Mr. Kettle, both from Colchester, who had a family of 10, I believe, or maybe it might have been 12, and 10 of those were sons. I think, yeah, 12 children and 10 sons. So they lost two sons within, about the space of a month. The third man on their private cell, I don't have a photo for him, but he is mentioned in the Essex County Standard as well, and I'll read a bit in a minute. But he was killed in action when he was trying to assist Josh Kettle. So Josh Kettle had been wounded, private cell went to assist him, and he was shot in the head and killed. So three of those men are connected. If you can go to the next slide, please, for me, Alex.
Sure. Sorry.
Yeah, so we talked about census earlier on. Was it Charlotte and Elizabeth both mentioned census? And so this is the 1881 census for the Kettle family in Colchester. So Enoch and Lucy Kettle were the parents. They had 10 sons and 2 daughters, and 5 of the sons served in the British Army. And there you have Joshua, Edgar, and Victor. Those were the 3 boys who served with the 1st Essex Regiment out in South Africa. And as we've seen, Josh, the oldest one, who's 7 in 1881, and Victor, who was only 3 months in 1881, they were killed. And Edgar did survive the war. But I'll just read you some extracts from the Essex County Standard, because it's a godsend, really. I mean, the paper has so much information in about these brothers. I'm not going to read all of it, of course, but you have the narrative. So you have the background written by the journalist, and he gives this information. So I'll just read this little part. So Private V. Kettle, born at Colchester on December 29th, 1880. So straight away, you've got a birth date. Previous to his enlistment in the Essex Militia, in 1897, he was employed by Colonel Lawrence of the 1st Dragoon Guard. So there you have that he was in the militia. It says, on the conclusion of one training in the militia, one training means that he would have done his 47 days and then enlisted in the regular army, which was fairly typical. Men would try out their hand at the militia, and if they liked it, they could then join the regular army. So he did that, joined the 1st York and Lancaster Regiment when it was stationed at Colchester. Again, see the soldiers in their brilliant uniforms, persuasive recruiting sergeant who takes him in for a beer, and he joins the York and Lancs. So you have an Essex man joining a York and Lancaster regiment. Was thinking better of it, perhaps, he was enabled to join the 1st Essex Regiment, in which 2 of his brothers already belonged. So that was obviously Edgar and Joshua. And then you have all this narrative, and it carries on in that vein, very rich information. And then you have a last letter received from Private Kettle, where he writes, we've had it a bit rough lately, and I'm a little hungry as I write this letter, but never mind, I think this is nearly all over now, as you'll see by the newspapers. I believe poor dear old Josh died in peace. He died for his country, as thousands have done before. And then he says, we never get any news about the war, only just round where we are, we can't get a smoke or anything. So it's all very, it's very colloquial, it's very chatty, it's very, as you'd expect in a letter. It's almost like the First World War, I'm in the pink, I hope you are the same, love Alf. It's that type of letter. So you have that, and then on, finally, as if that wasn't enough information for you, you have a letter from Edgar, the brother who survived, and he says that he saw Josh come back. He'd been with the Boers, with the Boers, the South African farmers, and he said they treated him very kindly, but they could not set the bone in his damaged leg. And he says in his letter, there was a poor chap among our boys who was killed in picking Josh up. He was with a head. Josh spoke to me about him. His name was Cecil, and that's
oh, wow.
Who I mentioned earlier. So, I think, the Essex County Standard, as I say, if that wasn't enough, there's also another big piece on Josh Kettle when he was killed, and really for these early records for the Boer War and for other conflicts, that information is crucial. I could work out from the regimental numbers when they joined the army, and you could get information from parish records on birth dates if the records are available, and you'll find them on census. But it's all that filler information that you get, the fact that he was posted to the 1st York Lakes, then in Colchester, that he was popular with his comrades, a smart soldier. All that's sort of circumstantial information is vital, and it really brings the men to life. And not only that, you get photos as well. So, you know, I just literally looked at those men. I don't think the other two Kettle brothers on the memorial are related to this particular family, but you know, I'd be following the similar path if I was looking at other men on that memorial. As Elizabeth said, I think, you know, look for the odd names. You'll find them far more easily, of course, than Smiths and Joneses and Browns and Williams. But you know, if people like to do things thoroughly, and you'll find, unless you're very lucky, that you'll do a war memorial and you'll have 19 names, but the 20th one completely eludes you, and you cannot think why on earth or where on earth that person came from. But yeah, fascinating to look at those men from the Boer War, a war that is, of course, largely eclipsed these days by the First War and the Second War. And you won't, of course, find those men on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which was started as the Imperial War Graves Commission in 1917. But you will find information about that war memorial on the Imperial War Museum website, for instance. So there's a list of all the names of the men on there.
Yeah, so if you go onto the IWM website, we have the War Memorials Register, as Paul says, so you can actually search by memorial, so you can look for the name of a place, or you can put in an individual's name, and as Paul mentioned, it goes earlier than the First World War.
Oh, great tip, thank you. Well, I'm loving the fact that every story we've looked at so far highlights one thing, which is the importance of using multiple sources together to paint these really rich stories. And I think most people who haven't tried this before would be, I mean, as we've just seen, staggered to realise just how much detail sometimes you can uncover. You can really build up full pictures of their lives. But anyway, on to me. So the war memorial I looked at is not necessarily my local one. I grew up other end of the country, but it's one that I walk past very frequently. It's on the banks of the River Thames, and it's one that's always fascinated me. So this is Richmond's War Memorial. This was designed by local architects Messrs. Goodale and Co. of Richmond. It was unveiled in 1921, I believe, by Field Marshal Sir William Robertson. I think it's grade listed too. It's lovely memorial, column with an orb on top. I think there was a statue of a sailor that was sadly beheaded by Vandals in 2003, which is a real shame. But it's got a lovely inscription on it, Pro Patria, 1914 to 1918, that says, "In remembrance of the men of this borough who gave their lives in the service of king and country during the Great Wars, 1914, 1918, and 1939 to 1945. So this memorial covers both wars. It's a big memorial, as you can see by the lists of names on there. Those names weren't actually added to the memorial until 1989. Following a newspaper campaign, as Paul just mentioned, not all memorials do contain full lists of names. You may need to check in local churches, that kind of stuff. But yeah, there was 686 names in total, which gives you an idea of how many men from the region sacrificed their lives. And of those 686, 527 of them were from the First World War, which is another reminder of how terrible that conflict really was. But anyway, I did exactly what we've discussed, and I focused in on some of the more unusual names. So this chap here, Hugh Lawrence Amsden, my first port of call was to have a look on Findmypast, and it appears that sadly, Hugh is one of those servicemen whose service records did not survive the fire, which I believe was in 1940, the Arnside Fire, I think it's called, when obviously, I think it was 60%, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, 60% of World War I service records literally went up in smoke. Those are, those are details that are lost forever. But if you find yourself in a similar situation and you can't find a service record, don't give up. There are other resources at your disposal. So one of the records I was able to find for Hugh, as well as his Commonwealth War Graves Commission record, it was virtually every soldier who died will have one of those, was a medal index card, which gave me a little bit more information about it. He was a private in the 16th Battalion of the London Regiment. He was killed in action on the 27th of May, 1915. He was aged just 26. So then a little bit, I had his birth date, I had his age, which meant I was able to work out his birth date. I was able to look him up in the census and find out that he was the son of Ernest and Emma Beatrice Amsden. And the next thing I did was Google, which is something we've just discussed. And I found this. So this was an entry, I must admit, this isn't from Findmypast. This is his entry in the Dulwich College Roll of Honour. And fantastic, we have a photo of Hugh to go with it, and it provides us this detail that I wouldn't have found anywhere else. It says born on the 17th of January 1889. He was in the second, I'm not going to try and guess that numeral, XV in 1907, 1908, and joined the Queen's Westminsters on leaving school. After studying accountancy with a firm of chartered accountants, he joined the staff of Messrs. Only AMSDEN and Sons Limited. Given that his surname is in the name of that company, it sounds like it could have been a family business. Where his cheery disposition soon made him a general favourite. He was one of the first to volunteer for active service on outbreak of war and met his death whilst helping a wounded companion from the trench near Albert on the 27th of May 1915. And what I really love about that is not only does it give us a bit more information about his life, where he was educated, the career he pursued, it tells us a bit about his personality. You know, he was obviously raring to do his bit. He was one of the first to volunteer for active service. And the fact that he lost his life while basically he essentially sacrificed his life to help a wounded companion tells us a little bit about the kind of man that Hugh was. So yeah, I just love discovering things like that. And the other soldier I looked at, I had to pick this because the name was just so unusual. Cecil Augustus Honour. That's a fantastic name, isn't it? It's not when you're searching in newspapers, because honour obviously is a word that's frequently used in many other capacities. So despite my best efforts, I've been unable to track down a image of Cecil, but given his wonderfully unusual name, a search by name alone was enough to bring back 2 copies of service records for him, which give us even more information. So the record on the left is the attestation form he will have filled in on when he was one of the first to volunteer for active service. And one of the things, while we don't have an image of Cecil, we do have a physical description for him. So it says he was 5'5", 133 pounds, hazel eyes, brown hair. That's about as far as it went. But in absence of a photo, we'll have to do our best to close our eyes and imagine Cecil. The service record continues. It goes on to give various details about where his service history. So I will just, so I can see, I've got it up in front of me now, that on the 12th of September 1915, that's when he embarked and joined the regiment in France. I can see that he was killed in action on the 23rd of November 1916. And the image on the right is, the reason I wanted to show that one was this was basically the statement of names and addresses of all relatives of the above named deceased soldier. So I wanted to show you this because service records can often open up a wealth of other information about his entire family. So here we've got listed in great detail his next of kin. So we've got the father of the soldier, the mother of the soldier, Sarah. You've got his full blood brothers, Percy and Leonard. You've got their addresses as well. Great pieces of information if you wanted to explore the family in more depth and start looking at them in censuses. As well as his full-blood sisters. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of time, but I just wanted to remind everybody what a wonderful resource service records can be when they're available. But as Hugh proved, you don't need to rely on a service record alone. Last but not least, this was the chap I found the most about, Henry Joseph Watlington. And the reason I focused in on him was because when you look at these war memorials, obviously due to the nature of the fighting, the vast majority of the men listed you will see will be army. Henry was a little unusual in that he was in the Royal Flying Corps. So that piqued my interest. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about Henry's life. And I found out quite a lot. He was quite an interesting figure. And one of the things I am yet to discover is why he is actually on the War Memorial in Richmond, because I haven't been able to establish his connection to the place. So he served with the 70th Squadron of the Royal Flying Corps, and he flew a Sopwith Camel, which is the aircraft you can see on the right of your screen. So Henry wasn't a Richmond native. He was actually born in Bermuda on the 14th of September 1896. And he was the eldest son of Henry William Watlington, who was a member of the colonial parliament and who was actually knighted in 1933. So given that Henry was from quite a prominent family, there's actually quite a lot of about him in the newspapers, and that's where a lot of this information came from. So Henry was educated in Canada. He attended Upper Canada College in Toronto from 1911 to 1914 and joined the Bermuda Volunteer Rifle Corps pretty early on in September 1914. That's when he left Bermuda for England in May 1915, and he finally reached the front in France in July 1915. So the newspaper reports surrounding his death and life have given me a few different bits of information about his military service. So I know he was severely wounded in the hip following the following winter and spent about 5 months in hospital recuperating in England. That's when, during his time back in England, that's when he trained for a commission with the Royal Flying Corps, being posted to Denham Aerodrome on October 1916, before being transferred to Oxford. Anyway, I'll move swiftly on to his death. So there was loads of more information about his training. He spent a month training at Turnberry Aerodrome in Scotland, which was actually used for, it was a school specifically for aerial fighting and gunnery. So that's where he learnt his train, I guess you could say. And he returned to the squadron. He joined his squadron on the 23rd of June 1917. So he was killed with his fellow airman Edward Gilchrist on the 6th of July 1917 while flying his, not a Camel actually, he was flying a Sopwith 1.5 Strutter B-70-14, which was a reconnaissance mission. He was sent over to take photographs of the German lines. Sadly, the plane was shot down and Watlington's body was pinned beneath the wreckage, which quickly caught fire. And apparently the Germans did attempt to recover his body, but the flames were so intense they weren't able to, and he was reported missing and officially declared killed in September. So I did a little bit more searching in our newspaper collection and on Google, and I actually found that his death was listed in Flight magazine, which was one of the most prominent aeronautical magazines at the time. They reported his death, and it also noted that he'd been married in July 1916 to Isabel, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Harrington Emerson of New York. They sound like quite a well-to-do transatlantic family. So yeah, just reading it quickly here. Reported killed on that date while engaged on a photographic reconnaissance. He was the eldest son, as we just said, Bermuda, and was 21 years of age. He was educated. That's where we got the information about his education. He enlisted in the Bermuda. I've just been through all that, so I don't need to read it again. So yeah, that's just to remind you that you can find loads of different sources. The image on the right is actually from a Roll of Honour I found him in, where it lists all the different places he was stationed, all the regiments he joined, basically a date-by-date timeline of his military service. So I think that's what I found. I will stop sharing my screen, depending on how everybody else is feeling. Do you think we can spare 5 minutes to perhaps answer some questions? 5-10 minutes?
Yeah.
We've definitely had some through. So let's get some up. I'll just refresh so I can see them all. So I get this will probably be a bit of a hands-up job unless they're specifically directed at anybody. I think the first one actually is for Elizabeth because it specifically mentions the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. So she said, this is from Hillary, who said, can I get the parents added to someone who is a casualty on the CWGC? If so, what do I need to provide to confirm that they are his parents?
I'm not sure that you can get the parent added, but the best people to tell you would be our inquiries team. So if Hillary goes to our website, well, if you Google CWGC inquiries, you'll come up with a link to our contact form. And then if Hillary fills that in, our inquiries team will be able to answer it. I think the answer is going to be no. But it's worth trying to see whether it's possible.
And actually, following on from that, another question for you. This is from Daphne. So, is your organisation still investigating unknown soldiers, and are there any plans to make another programme on television?
Okay, so that's maybe the programme that was on where was it that the MOD War Detectives programme?
That'll be the one.
Yeah. So what happens there is when bodies are recovered from France and Belgium, which happens usually about 30 to 40 casualties are recovered during the course of a year, found on the Western Front. Then there is an investigation to try and establish the identity of that person, which is actually carried out through the Ministry of Defence. I think that's correct. And then we become involved in it as well. So that's an ongoing thing, and we've also got people working, because we think we've got some of our casualties who are mentioned on memorials who might actually have a grave somewhere else. So what happened was that a casualty might have died, let's say, in the First World War. The commission was only established in 1917. Somebody might have come home from the front and then died, and their family wasn't aware that they could have had a Commonwealth War Graves headstone or anything like that, so they didn't contact us and tell us, and the person's been buried in the local cemetery without us knowing, and so we don't know that they've got a grave. So the name has gone on one of our memorials as a case for somebody who's missing, but we are aware that some of those who are mentioned on our memorials actually may well have graves around the country. So there are some people working to try and match up those cases, so we can take off names from our memorials and commemorate the person at their actual grave. There's been some quite interesting cases of that. I know there was one recently in Edinburgh that was brought to my attention when we thought there wasn't a grave, but actually there was one. So.
Oh, brilliant! Well, thank you for that. And I think I'm going to aim this next one at Charlotte. I'm going to pick on you. So I think we've actually had a few viewers asking about. So they've got family members who died while they were prisoners of war. They didn't specify whether it was First or Second World War, but I know obviously large amounts of prisoners were taken during the First World War as well as the Second. We tend to focus on the Second, and they basically just wondered what tips and advice you'd have. For starting finding out more, really, whether it's about tracking down records, whether it's learning more about the experiences of prisoners of war, where would be a good place to start?
Yeah, so certainly for the First World War records, you can go onto the website of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and you can actually put in somebody's name and search through that. And I have done that for John Berry, the man that I mentioned. Something to bear in mind is that sometimes spelling mistakes are made, which I think is the case for most records, to be honest. But because these records were compiled by the captors, so in my case by the Germans, sometimes these errors do creep in, and it can tell you a little bit that way. But in terms of kind of the prisoner of war experience more generally, if you go on to the IWM website, we've got a series of history articles, we have testimonies, we have photographs, all sorts of items linked to prisoners of war in both world wars. And so even though it might not link directly to your relative, it's a good way of finding out what that experience was. And you can search for a particular camp, for example, if you knew that they were interned in there. So I'd have a look at the IWM website as well.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of people tend to, you find a record, you're like, great, I've discovered this, and focus in on the date, the location, the service number. I'm not sure how many people actually do the reading around to kind of understand the context and put yourself, I know it's impossible to put yourself in those shoes, but try and kind of get a better understanding of what it actually would have been like, which is an important part of the story, really.
Yeah.
There's some useful Facebook groups as well, actually, Alex. So I run a Facebook group for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for our supporters in the north of England, but we've got them for all around the country. And one of the groups I've come into contact with through that is there's a FEPOW, a Far East Prisoner of War Facebook group.
Yes, I've actually been on that myself before.
And the members on that are really helpful about helping people find out about their family history. If you just put in Facebook FEPOW, FEPOW, I'm sure it will come up. I think it's something FEPOW relatives or something like that. And they're always giving people tips on how to research and explaining about what life would have been like for those prisoners of war.
Alex, can I just add to that as well? So Charlotte mentioned the ICRC collection. We have that on Findmypast. We've indexed it on Findmypast, so you find it more easily there. We also have Far Eastern Prisoners of War. We've got the Burma Star records. We've got prisoners of war from the Second World War as well. We are the best site of all the sites to come to for prisoner of war records.
You beat me to it. I was about to say that plug myself. And they're one of my favorite. I say this about so many collections, but they genuinely are one of my favorites because there's so much in there. it's a really mixed bag. Yeah, you can find out all sorts. And actually, Paul, I think this is definitely a question for you, because I know you've done a bit of this yourself. So this is from Judith, who said, if you come across a medal and you've researched the family and you can't find any living relatives, what's the proper thing to do with the medal? What do you think you should do?
Keep it, enjoy it, research it. Yeah, I mean, look, lots of people, I get asked all the time by people, I found this medal, I want to return it to the relatives. Well, that's very noble, but the relatives may not want it. They might have been the ones who got rid of it in the first place. But don't let that stop you from trying. But if you can't contact them, and it often will be difficult to try and find descendants, then just enjoy the medal for what it is, and treasure it and research it and try and find out as much as you can about the person, because you may treasure it more than the actual family. Yeah,
and you've got an amazing piece of history in your hands there, really. Yeah. And actually tied to that, I think this is another question for you, Paul. So this is from Andrew Benbow, who said his profile picture is a man named Edward Lewis Benbow, who's his third cousin. He was in 85th Squadron and died on the 30th of May, 1918. By coincidence, his uncle was Andrew Benbow and was involved in repatriation ceremonies for the repatriation because he was superintendent of the Royal Mews. Basically, can somebody help me track down Edwin's military cross, as it wasn't passed down any line as far as I can see, as his brother William also died in 1918.
Track down his medals. Well, I mean, again, I think you need to, I offer this advice on one of my websites. You need to try and get the information out there that you're looking for, get the person's name out there, put it on, join forums, post requests for it. Yeah, just advertise that you're looking for the medal, and hope, and let the search engines try and find it for you. Go to catalogues, online auctioneers like Dix Noonan Webb, who have an auction tomorrow, coincidentally, and Spink and Son and others. There's plenty of auctioneers. Look through their catalogues online, see if the medal has materialised in the past. Do put it out there that you're looking, and then one day the medal might turn up. Of course, it might have been lost, it might have been scrapped, but I mean, it is like looking for a needle in a haystack, or can be.
Tough one, but there's always a chance, I guess. And I think I'll do this as a general question to anybody, to all of you, for the last question, because it's a repetition of something that everybody's been asking. Lots of people in different variations have been saying, I've been looking for this person, I can't find any records, what do I do next? There's different variations, someone looking for someone in the horse artillery, someone looking for someone in the Navy, someone looking for pre-World War I records. So basically, if you're at a brick wall, each of you feel free to say something. What are your tips for kind of breaking through barriers that you might hit?
Mine is to sleep on it, wake up the next morning, and you honestly, this happened to me with this search for Dorothy Wardell. I couldn't see past. I can't remember what the block was, but I couldn't see past it. I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning. I thought, that's what you need to search for. But again, Googling, using Facebook groups. People often post on my group saying, I'm trying to track such and such down, and other people will help you. People are very generous with their time and their ideas. So if you could track down a group that's specifically about whatever you're asking for, and then post a question on there and see if you can get anywhere with it.
What about you, Charlotte? Any tips? Oh, sorry, Paul.
You've got ladies first. Go on, Charlotte, carry on.
I would just echo what Elizabeth said, really, because there are always times where you can't see a way forward, and reaching out to people, be they family historians or experts, or even museums and archives. So for example, I'm going to at some point go down to the local archive and see if there's anything there that can help with my research. If you know that somebody served in a particular regiment or unit, see if they've got a museum and they might have information for you. As Elizabeth said, just reach out and see if someone can help.
That's a great point, actually. Not everything is online, so you probably will, if you're really serious about this, you probably will hit at some stage the need to go and actually track down physical documents, whether that's in your local archive. Support your local archives, they're important. It could be your local family history society. They'll have a lot of material that hasn't been digitized. Your local history society, museums, libraries. Yeah, cast the net wide. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Charlotte and Elizabeth. I would say certainly look in the archives when we can all get out again and go to archives, and archives are properly open, then do that. I mean, I'm thinking of muster rolls and pay lists at the National Archives, great source of information. But also, 20 years ago, how much was online? Did we have online 20 years ago, 30 years ago? There was certainly 30 years ago, there was nothing. And now look what there is. I mean, we've got service records, there's medal index cards, there's pension cards, there's goodness knows what. And whilst the service records and pension records at National Archives have been digitized, there aren't any more hiding anywhere, as far as we know. Don't necessarily think that isn't the case. I mean, people do discover other records tucked away in other collections, or some nominal rolls suddenly appear, or lists appear. So whilst you might not find any more information today, you might find something in a year's time. I mean, records are being published all the time. There's never been a better time, in my opinion, to be interested in family history and looking at family history, because Findmypast and others publish millions of records and keep on publishing millions of records. So just don't expect to find everything. I know it's easy now, isn't it? Everybody wants this instant gratification. You click on a mouse and you want to find your going back generations in half an hour. I mean, you can do that, but you won't necessarily find everything. So just don't give up hope and keep coming back.
That would be mine too. I think it's true to say that every day is a better day to research than yesterday, because the rate at which we alone, the rate at which we're adding millions of names a week. I mean, just this week, I think we've got a whole new tranche of soldiers' medical records from the National Archives joining the site. We've got the collection that you worked on, Paul, for the Coventry Blitz, detailing civilian casualties. Fascinating one. Do check that out. There's more material coming online. So every day is better than yesterday. Don't give up hope. I had the same thing. So I was stuck on my great-grandfather's war, and I discovered a little bit, and I had to wait about 3 years until the first batch of the medical records came online. And that's when I figured out, oh, he'd been gassed. And he was sent back to England. That's why he vanished. So yeah, do keep trying. But I think as we're 10 minutes over, we'll probably start saying our farewells. And before we say bye to Charlotte and Elizabeth, thank you again very, very much for joining us. How can people keep track with the work you guys do? How can they learn more? How can they stay in touch?
Okay, so for IWM, you can visit our website. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. And as I say, at the moment, the museum is sadly closed, but you can get involved online. So, for example, excuse me, this evening we have a broadcast on BBC Radio 3, which is our annual Remembrance debate. So you can tune into that. And we've got various things that are coming up. So yeah, please do check us out and follow us.
And for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, again, we've got our website, cwgc.org, and we're on Facebook. And if you search on Facebook, CWGC supporters of, then you'll get a list of the different areas of the country. So you could join a local supporters group. And if people haven't had enough of Facebook Live, they could go to CWGC's Facebook page at 6:30. We're going to be starting off a live there, because we've got a campaign at the moment for people to try and light a star up in the virtual sky. So if you go to cwgc.org/shine on, then you will be able to click through and name a star in the virtual sky after one of our casualty names. And tonight at 7 o'clock, we've got 4 beams of light at different locations around the country. So one from Plymouth Naval Memorial, Brookwood Military Cemetery, Cardiff Cathay Cemetery, and Edinburgh Rosebank Cemetery. There's going to be a light shone from there. We don't want people to come down to those places to see it. If you're within about an 8-mile radius of those sites, you'll be able to open your front doors and look out at 7 o'clock and see the light that's shining. And if you're not near them, you can open your doors and look out and look up into the sky, and just take a minute to remember those who lost their lives in the First and the Second World Wars.
Oh wow, that's a lovely idea. I look forward to, sadly I don't think I'm near enough to be able to see any of that, but I look forward to seeing the photos. I'm sure there will be many. And on the Facebook Live, of course, they're going to be broadcasting from those different sites. So those of us who aren't near them, and I'm one of them, will be able to watch it via the internet. Oh, well, I will be tuning in also. Brilliant. Well, yeah, thanks again to everybody. I'd just like to remind everybody watching, if you're not a subscriber to Findmypast, all our military records will be free until midnight tomorrow. So now is a great opportunity to go in, have a play around and see what you may find. And again, if this has left you inspired enough to go away and start researching the names on your own local war memorial, let us know what you discover. I think the hashtag is it's hashtag share their stories. So thanks also to Paul. And again, I think we'll leave it at that. So thanks everybody. Thanks to everybody that's watching. Thanks for your comments and questions. And we will be seeing you again in the not too distant future, hopefully. Bye now.
Bye, Alex. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.